So welcome to our viewers, and I'm privileged today to have as my guest Alexia Lawson, generally referred to as Lexi. And my journey with Lexi has been incredibly interesting because she is the editor of the book that I've just launched, and that is Embracing Time, Personal Reflection. And it has been an interesting journey because I've learned a lot through it. I think I do have become enriched as a result of the interaction that I've had with her. It has also changed my concept about what an editor really is. But some background to Lexi first is that while she was raising her family on a busy fruit farm, she enrolled for a Bachelor of Arts degree and chose English literature as her major, which is interesting because the thought, and I go back to when I was in matric, and we were forced to read Shakespeare, and literature just sort of was Shakespeare. And we really didn't enjoy it that much. And one actually only starts to enjoy literature, I think, when one is not forced to look at it from a critical perspective and also from what the examiner expects one to reproduce. She started a career in editing and enrolled in various courses, and she has also been involved in courses through the University of Queensland and the University of Cape Town, and where she did a short course in copy editing. And you've participated in many activities of the Professional Employers Editors Guild, and fascinated because literature changes and the way in which things are expressed also changes. If I think about punctuation and how that has probably evolved over a period of time, and where does punctuation come in and where does it not come in? So I'm really thrilled to have her with me in our discussion this afternoon. It's not going to be about my book because that you need to read for yourself. And it's just that I'm intrigued about it and about editing as such, having gone through my experience with her. So Lexi, welcome, and I thank you very much for joining us, and I welcome to our discussion, and I look forward to it.
Thanks, Gav. It's a privilege for me to be on this blog with you, especially after I watched a few of your other guests, and I thought they were wonderful, and especially Sonia. Sonia's talk blew me away. She's her commitment to making a difference and her vision, how to achieve it is like really inspiring. I'm just wondering how she's feeling about Shell right now because she brings Shell up. So when she updates, ask her.
But
I don't
surely
know. Yes, you.
It's interesting because we all want to make a difference, and I think that's no matter what role we play and what we do, part of our, I think, natural inclination is to want to make a difference and to create a positive change in whatever we're doing. So I have great respect, but for editors now, I think after I've been on this journey, but previously and prior to the onset of our journey, I'm not so sure that I had such a good relationship with editors, because my experience of an editor is one that you receive your manuscript and it is just full of marks and comments and, this is not good enough, and, go and rewrite the whole thing and come back and try again. What do you think you were thinking about? And when I approached you, and I remember asking you about how are you going to set about editing the work, and am I going to receive something back which is just so demoralizing that I don't want to actually continue with it? So that is my perception, and fortunately you've changed that for me into a very positive one, because I think that it has actually helped me to convey what I wanted to in my book. But what led you into the field of editing? You mentioned that you majored in English literature, and then you suddenly took off onto editing. What intrigues you about it? What draws you into it?
my life took me into the country, and there was no editors in the early days. Worked for one of the big publishing houses, and they got in-house training, and that was where editors were. And obviously, I couldn't be there, not living in the country. But then the internet happened, so I had a little business, and I was doing quite well, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And your other guests that I listened to, all spoke about intuition. And I remember just going into the hills, into hiking, and thinking that I'm not enjoying this so much. And it's like, not really what I want to be doing. What do I want to do? And then in that process of just like a walking meditation, which is why Sonia interested me, but they all spoke about intuition. I knew when I got down, when I landed at the bottom of the mountain, I thought, actually, why didn't I just edit? Why didn't I go into it? And I found out about these courses that I could do with John Linnegar, McGillivray Linnegar Associates, and did them. And that changed my life. That gave me the confidence and inspired me to be able to freelance, and it developed from there. Yes, that was
But it's editing and not writing. Why not writing? Because if you have that skill that looks at phrasing and subordinate clauses and bullet points versus paragraphs and set up and style, why not write?
I did. I always on the farm. I would write little short stories, but they were never good. I never knew where to go with them. And I did writing courses, and I always thought writers are heroes. I'm so in awe of people who can actually get a book out. I think it's an enormous achievement. And so my role is really to help writers tell their stories in the best way. And you have to be sensitive to the writer's voice. So an authoritarian editor, I would never be that. You know that, Garth, that I would never bully you. And I learned a lot from you when we worked together on your book. When we went backwards and forwards and we discussed and debated, it was a learning curve for me as well. Not only what was in your book, but the way we went about it. And also when you questioned me about things. And we had to think about it. I had to think about it. Think, actually, Garth's right. I'm wrong. It was great. Yeah.
And so editing actually is an art, and one of the things that you mentioned was to actually try and get the nuance of what the writer is trying to convey, the narrative of that book. And yes. I wonder to what extent you actually become embroiled in the actual narrative of it, and how much you actually then associate yourself with what is written.
I'm so involved. I keep a little notebook next to my bed, and I sometimes wake up in the night and think, oh gosh, that's what I should have. I must recommend that one. That's the right word or something. Because sometimes I think that word isn't quite right, but I can't think of a better one. I can't think of anything else. And then it can come to me in the night. So I try to get into the author's head and try to really understand what it is, what they're trying to say and how they're trying to say it, and in what way can I help without intervening too much, and with keeping the author's voice is very important. Trying to find the author's voice and maintaining that. Because I feel that when I get it right, it's a fantastic cooperative collaboration in being creative together. It's wonderful when I can work properly with a writer. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's great, because we're thinking the same. I'm thinking with you, and yes.
So I think it's interesting because if I just think about this and reflect, and I think about the consultation that I'm involved with patients, is that the patient has a particular agenda, although it's not defined as such by the patient, him or herself, and presents a narrative. Then myself, as the consultant, the medical practitioner, listens to that narrative and interprets it in a way which might not be in accordance with the way in which the patient is relating that narrative. And so it actually is looking at developing a common agenda.
Yes, the same.
So understanding of what the narrative is of the patient, it's understanding the narrative of the author. And then, so you've got the editor who has his and her own skills. You have, which then, shall we say, is the practitioner, and you have the patient with their own knowledge of themselves. And somehow you've got to marry those two to coming up with a common agenda, which I think obviously is what you're telling me, is that you get involved, you get into it, you try to understand what is being conveyed. And I wonder then, two things that come out of this is, one, when you are approached to edit a manuscript or maybe a potential book, are there times that you would refuse?
Yes, definitely. If it's something that I feel I can't cope with, I wouldn't do it. Certain, I'm not going to say, but subjects that I wouldn't want to support.
Yes.
I
understand. I mean, like there were certain books that I wouldn't want to read because I thought the content would really be. I don't like the content, and it doesn't sit well with me, if I could call it that.
Well, if I think the author's not being authentic, that's another thing, and that's what came across in your book so strongly for me when I read it. That you had something that you thought about deeply, and it was important for that to get out. Your deep thinking about time, mostly about time, but so much else, so much that came out of that. That yes, I think it came across extremely strongly for me that you were. You were a deep thinker, and you had things to say, and authentic. Yes, authentic. Your own thoughts, your own that you'd puzzle through, you'd work through,
thank you.
And we got it right. I think we did.
I think we did. And now we just wait to see. And getting back to that, so that was the one question that, yes, if you feel that this is not something that you'd like to deal with, that you don't feel that the author's being genuine, authentic, or anything of that nature, to what extent, though, do you think that you are sometimes influenced by what you are editing? Because you mentioned that you try to immerse yourself into what the writer is conveying, and this becomes a danger for us as well. As a practitioner, we have the patient with their narrative, and if we become too embroiled in that narrative, it actually then affects our objectivity in managing it, and it then creates a different type of relationship where the patient then becomes dependent. And I'm not saying the writer becomes dependent on the editor, but to what extent do you think that you are influenced overall by some of the works that you probably have to edit? And does it sometimes change your perspective on certain things? In other words, how much do you really identify with what is being written and saying, goodness gracious me, maybe I've got to look at things a little bit differently in terms of my own life?
Absolutely.
So,
and absolutely.
That must be quite a danger, I think, in a way, because it can influence you positively as well as negatively.
I don't feel as if been influenced negatively yet. I'll bear that in mind. I've been led into places that are into, when I check facts in that people write about some, well, I've got to check. I've got to make sure it's a real place, or if it is, where it is, and so on. For instance, that, or sometimes journeys, and I've had to check on how long they really could have taken. But the fact checking often takes me into places, into history, into areas of the world that I would have not gone, that I've not ventured into. And yes, and your thoughts, your advice often comes to me, and I think I go out and I just think, Garth says, just stop, just stop and stare. So if I find myself getting too panicky about something, or too hyper, just slow down and take a breath and stop and look and just calm down and think about what you're doing.
It really is. It's fascinating, this, because it's life. We change, we grow, and things change as we, I think, become more mature. There's a lot more experience that we have, and we then can acknowledge and recognize some of these changes that occur. And the one thing that I've noticed so much now is, and perhaps this is not a good thing for me, because when I start looking at things, and I look at signage, and I look at various things that are posted on various screens and so on, I start to look at it and think, well, is that punctuation correct? Isn't there a better way of expressing it? Have they left out a word? And I find this, unfortunately, a situation now that I start looking at various articles that come through, and I think, that's not quite what Lexi probably would have done with this article. So one looks at it from a different perspective, and unfortunately, I think that's a danger. Except if I'm reading a well-known author, and yet sometimes I think maybe they should have rephrased it or put it in a different way. To what extent, though, because you mentioned that you love reading, when you are reading something, that you read it with an editor's eye, or you read it from a person who just wants to read and enjoys reading? Or do you mix them up sometimes?
I try to read good authors. So yes, even if they're old, and I feel as if that really helps me with my editing, keeping myself in line with what's, because I think that's where you learn a lot about editing, is just from reading. You just get a sense of what good writing is like, and it becomes easy, it becomes natural that you can look at a sentence, and because of the flow, the flow is not working, so you know how to make it work. But you do have to keep reading. You have to keep on with the top writers. That's what I can't read second rate, because that wouldn't help me at all. So I wanted to show you a little book. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen it? This one? Oh, yes, you can't see it because it's wrong way around.
I've seen it. I've got it, and I've read through it.
Have you got it? Yes. And she runs around putting stickers, the stickers on with the punctuation repair kit. So climbs ladders and sticks them on signs, shop signs, and
correct.
So I'm going to talk about descriptivists and prescript. You prescribe or you describe. So that was something that I found very interesting in one of the courses I did through the Australian Queensland University. There was a big debate going on about what do you do? Is it better to be a descriptivist or a prescriptivist? And the two are the people wanting to hold on to the old ways and being pedantic about the correct, and other people saying, but English has moved on, you got to go with what's new. So there's this quite a battle going on between these two groups in the top areas of the language. So I suppose I was fit somewhere in the middle, because I think writers are able to break rules nowadays. I mean, that's how language is alive, and it moves on, and it's becomes the writers some writers can, with the novelists that I edit, they can do things with dialogue, and it's not correct, but it works because that's how people speak. Right. So that's also quite nice. It's quite nice to know about that debate going on. And if you're interested, you should do that course if you want to. I mean, it's called English Grammar and Style, and it's online, and you don't have to pay for it. It's free, unless you want the certificate, which I wanted. But it's just was very interesting about that particularly. And you have access to all the top people in the world. Just Google edX and see. It's fabulous.
Just repeat that, to Google edX.
edX, capital E, small d, and the capital X. Okay. It's an online learning university. They offer lots of things, but I see the English Grammar and Style one keeps coming back. They do a lot of stuff with science, and but it's curious just to when I did that course and I looked into the whole thing, and I listened to the he's an Indian, he's in America. When I listened to his excitement about his first course, and then I thought, people who want to learn, here it is. It's all online. They can really get into anything that they want to get into because it's available. I mean, you don't have to put this onto what, for the vlog, but I'm just saying this to you. Rather take it off. But yeah.
So one of the other things one of the things that I think is quite important, and maybe you need to, if there are aspirant authors listening to our discussion today, is two things. One is, how does one choose an editor? Well, maybe the first thing is, does one really need an editor? And don't try and self-edit. Now, I've been involved in a number of publications with the South African Society of Travel Medicine, and we've had 2 or 3 editors on the book that we produced, publications. And that's difficult, because one of the things that you have to do is to actually know what you're looking for, and that there has to be uniformity between the editors. And now the point comes to an author and aspirant author, and they say, right, well, I've been told that I need an editor. How does one go about selecting an editor? I know the process that I went through, and you've already indicated, well, obviously it's your work, and you say, right, you do need an editor. I can certainly vouchsafe for that, because I don't think the book would be as, how shall I put it, not just grammatically correct, but I think in sequencing and looking at the finer nuances of it to help convey what I was trying to convey. So I certainly don't regret it by any manner of means. And the thing would be to encourage aspirant writers, authors, to have an editor. But how does one go about finding an editor?
You go onto the Professional Editors Guild, PEG. They've got a website. and they've got lots of editors, and you just type in there what sort of editor you want, and you choose something. Maybe you just write you write to them, and they put it in the chat group, and they often put your requests on the chat group, and people can answer, and you make sure usually I would ask them, if I see a job advertised, I would ask them I would say I'm available, if I am available, obviously, and then I would say, send me a sample of your work, and I'll edit it, and you can see whether you would like to work with me. So then I do like a page, or not even maybe it depends how busy I am. If I want this for later, or if I do desperately want the work, I'll do a few pages and just show them how I would edit the rest of their book, and tell them how much I charge, and then leave it up to them. Yeah, so I've had a few jobs like that, but not many. Mostly I get work, people come to me, and I don't know how, but sometimes I get a request, and I do that sample, and some people won't contact me again. They say, oh, no thanks, not her. One man sent me a few short stories to edit, and I've been editing for him for a while now, because he branched into novels, into quite big novels. But we started just with small edits. I think he was maybe testing me, but it was nice. We work well together. That's good.
I think it's.
And then go on. No, I was working on an author in England, and something happened, and I was in the state, and I said, if you want to find another editor, really, I'll pay you for the deposit. And he said, no, he understood, and he would wait. And you were so fantastic when having just about reached the end of the edit, and I got COVID. Do you remember? I felt so terrible, because we decided we were going to finish the end of June, and I got COVID, and you had to wait. You were so patient. Thank you. I appreciate that immensely.
No, it was only a pleasure to do that, because I just thought, and I was just hoping that, and so nice that you were able to get back into it and carry on.
Well, so writers are fabulous. Writers are so good.
So it's certainly something I when you talk about how to select an editor, I was given a selection of, I think, 3 or 4 different editors, and I approached each one of them, and then I approached you, and I don't know, I think there was just something that actually made me feel that I would be comfortable. I also thought that you probably had a better understanding of what I was. Now, this doesn't really, and I don't mean it with any disrespect to any of the other people that I approached, that maybe you would have had a better understanding of what it was that I was trying to convey. And I think that's critical, because I didn't want somebody to go and change what I was trying to set out in the book, which is basically a personal reflection. Mm-hmm. And I don't want them to take it and then to turn it into something which still gives a reflection, but it isn't my personal, the way in which I would do it. And I fall into this trap, because sometimes my daughters would ask me, can I help them write a letter? And the problem is, then I use phrases that I am accustomed to. And she said, no, that's not me. That I would never write it like that. If I went and submitted this to my superior in my workplace, they would say, but this is not your own writing. So, and that's what I think is so terribly important, that the aspirant writer needs to be sure that there is some way in which that common agenda can actually be achieved. And it's so wonderful to be able to work with you and to do it. And
I don't know how.
Carry on.
Yeah. How did you? What made you choose me?
I think
did
I
you look at
reserve
my
that.
website?
No, there were a couple of things, and I don't want to elaborate on too much, because I think one is I've got to look at an editor that probably has been through a similar journey.
Yes. Yes.
So if I was to approach an editor who perhaps is 35, would they have the same understanding into what it is that I was trying to convey? Because it's a reflection of over 50 years.
Yes. Yes.
And things that I talk about or mention just briefly in the book are things that they've probably never come across. You know, using a inkwell and a dip pen.
Yes.
That to them is
archaic.
It really is. It's, you know, we've never come across it. And although I don't talk about typewriters and the IBM golf ball typewriter and things of that nature, but many of the things would be aspects that they've never come across. Now, either it would interest them or they would dismiss it.
They would be irritated. Maybe.
And they would then just delete it. And I sort of think that's not what I wanted. And so, yes, your website, I think, was important. And I think that the other thing that was seeing the way in which you edited, because as I mentioned to you, I don't like editors, or didn't. I have to rephrase that.
Thank you.
That I didn't. Because of I just felt that they were out to virtually crucify what I'd written.
Yes.
And all I could see was that there wasn't a single line of what I wrote that didn't have a red mark through it. So I've been influenced by it, and yes, I've been asked to edit some newsletters for the society, and I'm very, very conscious of trying specifically not to change things so much that the person who's written it says, I'm not even going to want to let you review what I've written. And I think that's a danger. But the way in which you actually allayed my fears that, no, this is not the way we do it. And the sample editing that you did for me. Firstly, I wanted to know that could I actually contribute something that was worthwhile? Because I felt I could. And if I was to give it to my wife, she'd say, yes, of course you can. But that's very a biased opinion. And I was hoping that the editor that I approached would say, it looks as though you've got something worthwhile to contribute. It's worthwhile doing. Or do they just shut the door and say, that's it? It's, you know, I'm not the person and I don't think you're doing it. And the way in which you actually set out and I sent you, I think it was just a chapter that I sent you, and you showed me how you did it. And that made me feel very comfortable. And I think it's the same situation if I talk about it, and I can only relate this to the doctor-patient relationship, is that my patient needs to feel comfortable with me. And there are many patients who don't feel comfortable with me, and I understand that. And I accepted that, yes, they would rather see someone else because we just don't knit together.
Yes.
And that was critical for me, is that you did make me feel comfortable, and that I didn't feel as though you were going to just tear the book apart, which maybe in your mind you might want to have done. But nonetheless, in writing it didn't. So it was a lovely journey, and I want to thank you very much, and thank you for our discussion today.
I want to say, oh wait, no, I read something here about your thoughts. This is what I should have said earlier. Your thoughts, your deep thinking, and you put everything into an accessible place for others who may stop and think, may come up with more ideas. You nudge them, and they can then move the world along into, we hope, a better place for future generations. So that's
Sure.
what I thought about your book. Yes.
Well,
So
thank you very much.
just
It's also part of a legacy that I'm hoping to do. And I sort of think, well, is there room for another? I don't know. But
see.
I've certainly valued our time together, and I'd like to try and, if there is another, that we embark on another journey together. Because
It was
it's been
lovely.
wonderful.
I enjoyed it very, very much. You, as I said, you taught me a lot. You really did. You made me question myself and go back and have another look. And it was great. It was great. I learned from every author, but I learned a lot from
Sure.
you.
And I think this is the same again, if I refer to that interaction that I have with the patient. We constantly learn. We learn from each other, and we grow as a
Yes.
result of it. And I think that that is so vital, because there can be so much change that can occur through all that process. And we
Yes.
all
What a
contribute
pity we're
to
getting.
it.
I'm saying, what a pity we're getting on. We should be here for another 100 years. So,
Well, maybe medical science will move in such a way that we will be, but I'm not so sure that I would very much enjoy that. And maybe we will not have the mental capacity to write a coherent story or produce a coherent narrative. But thank you very much for your time, and I wish you well and happy editing. And I do hope that we will maintain our communication in some form or another. And when I am visiting the wonderful place where you are in the Western Cape, I will certainly come and visit you and pop in and say hello. So thank you very
brilliant.
much for your time.
Love that.
Really
And
appreciate it.
thank you for
Thank you then.
Thank you for putting me onto the blog.